Hi, I'm Dr Gail Austen and this is my DICE talk. The talk today is about citizen science, which ties in quite nicely with the BioBlitz. Some of the concepts I'm going to go through, it's a little bit meandering and I might sweep over, but citizen science itself is a massive field of, it's just a massive discipline. It means different things to different people. But what I wanted to look at here, this is a co-occurrence word network, and as you can see here we've got citizen science, you probably can't see the smaller words, but public engagement, volunteer geographic information. And what I'm going to try and do is when I speak today, it's going to include things like community science, participatory activities, so I want you to think of it as an umbrella thing, and there's not one definition for it, and there's books dedicated to this. But like I say, we're looking at, there's some bottom-up work, there's some top-down work, but I want you to think that I'm all into etymology. Etymology's all right, but they're a bit small. But the roots of the word science just comes from to know. So just think about that. It's not necessarily professional. It's not that you maybe do it as an amateur. And I think that our move away from amateur naturalist to citizen science or community science, however you want to see it, is a really good reflection of how much expertise sits in these communities. So amateur sounds like you don't know what you're on about, where in fact it just means non-professional. And I think there's so much expertise out there that we don't necessarily have necessary access to, but those people don't always have a voice either. So think of the bigger picture. Your citizen science can be projects that people develop and ask people to join in to collect data for them, or they can be something that communities come together and they have a bigger question and they try to recruit other people to help. And along with citizen science, I'm also going to be ignoring the skepticism. So this is a paper, paper's quite good. It wasn't that it was decrying anything that citizen science do, but what I do have a problem with is one of these quotes from the paper. Again, the paper's good, but that quote very much indicates that it's a one-way thing in that we're explaining for these people to go and collect our data from us, and that's not the case. It's very much a two-way thing. So as in the title, although I've written experts and expertise, I wanted to try and pull those two phrases apart. So an expert to me sounds like a noun. It sounds like it's something that's fixed in time, that it's a being, whereas expertise is actually a movable feast. It's dynamic, it's subjective. My friends think I'm great because they send me a photo and I can identify it. Woo-hoo. But part of my experience knows that often what they will see, the time of year they see it, the fact that it's visible to them, or maybe associated with certain habitat, and the fact I worked at a record centre, which we'd have loads of people sending us photos going, what, and this was my learning curve. So they think I'm very good. But then in reality, relative to other people in the audience, like our guest, John Badmin, I'm not going to embarrass you, I know has I met him when I was working in the record centre, and he has a great history and expertise in entomological parts, I'm sure etymological parts as well. And he is someone that I would go to if I had a query, because I know his expertise is vast. But as I say, it's a movable feast in that we learn new things. If you think that anybody who's studying has papers, you start undergrad and you're writing things down because it's great because people tell you stuff, and then you get to masters, then you have to query, and then you're at PhD and you're like, oh my God, who do I believe? There's all these people arguing and they're all experts in their field. So what do I take away from it? And as we have new knowledge, that goes into the pot. As people leave the field, that knowledge maybe goes with them, but it's still definitely a community of practice, and it's not static. So one of the greatest platforms for citizen science is Zooniverse. Has anybody here ever heard of Zooniverse? So it has this all array of different projects you can get involved in. This snapshot from the website is just clicked on a tab called Nature. It's one of 3 pages that look at nature projects. But look how much of this is dedicated to imagery. Whether it's you send in photos, whether they've got photos they're asking you to look at, Squirrel Mapper, Fin Vision, Ocean Eyes. They give you an idea of what they're all about, but there are ways to get involved. And the beauty about anything citizen science is that it gives fresh perspectives. And one of the favourite stories I have from citizen science was Galaxy Zoo, which is linked to Zooniverse. When it went out, people were trained what to look for in galaxies. There was this blue dot that one of the ladies had been picking up. So you're giving a spotter sheet, what galaxy can you see? So you report what you see in the images that you pick up to process. But when this lady had reported that she kept seeing this blue thing, what is it? It turned out it's something that all the classically trained people had overlooked because that's not what they were looking at. And it's now called Hani's object. I won't try and insult anyone of what the actual pronunciation is in Dutch. But it's a brand new type of astronomical object previously unknown to scientists. So again, that very fresh perspective has always got something to offer. So Jess suggested that I put this in about my background. I did really badly in my at A-levels. I got 3 E's, which my parents were really upset about. So I just got a job, realised that I hated accountancy, did lots of other things. And I didn't start my academic career till I was 30, where I went back and did an animal management degree. And it took me on this meandering path through volunteering, through academia. And this is what really kind of whetted my appetite. So when I was at the Record Centre, I volunteered there in the 3rd year of my degree, and we did British wildlife. I always knew that I loved animals, but I didn't know that much about British wildlife. And then I started getting involved in local conservation groups. And one thing that stuck with me was the Kentfield Club. When I was involved with them, there was a lot of expertise and there was a lot of commentary on how people weren't coming through the system. There weren't any pure zoology degrees much anymore. So even though we had conservation as a degree, which I think is a relatively new discipline, probably not. I was born in black and white, so it might be different if you're younger. But some of that speciality, and then when I looked into it, I ended up doing a master's at the Natural History Museum in taxonomy and biodiversity, which was really fascinating. And I remember going into the wet room, of which they've got a lot of the collections. Some of them are what Darwin brought back on his travels. And with that, I just imagined what those people that collected those specimens, how they would feel today, how we could answer questions. So I think we still have the same how, why, what does it do? We just have very different ways of answering them. So I don't know if you're familiar with the term standing on the shoulders of giants, but as we go forward, everywhere we are now links back to things that have gone before, which we've had positive things and we've learnt lessons for maybe things that we wouldn't consider the correct thing today, like with David Attenborough. Even one lifetime, he would go out and collect animals from the wild for ZooQuest, and he's very much against it now, but everything we learn all has something to offer and all goes into the pot. And also, academically trained means just that. It doesn't make you more knowledgeable, it just makes you trained in a certain way. And I can't see how maybe a professor of economics can be any better at identifying a species than a 10-year-old enthusiastic child. So again, I think that's where citizen science feeds in to what we know. But in this talk today, I'm going to concentrate a little bit more on what I know or what I think I have got experience in. And again, it doesn't mean to say that everybody else's experience is the same. But this is a conference in biological recording that's coming up soon, and I couldn't have picked a better phrase to use myself, so I've taken it from them. But in the UK, at least, the biodiversity we monitor is really, really important. It feeds into bigger picture, bigger decisions, everything from house building to land management. There are lots of places that you can upload your records, but those records are widely used from all sorts of levels. Some of this comes from the projects that we've already seen, maybe on the Zooniverse projects or ones that people collect data on because they're specially set up. They also come from ad hoc conservation with the recording groups that you'll see in Kent. We saw Kentfield Club, mammal group, there's bat groups and badger groups, and there's so much expertise out there. And the recording is, I've got a different talk on recordings. That's another field subject to go into. But what we need to do is we need to know what's out there and how these organisms interact before we can make decisions. And if we don't know what's out there, how can we not only provide the information to decision makers, but understand ourselves how things work? So we're quite used to this. Ecology stems from oikos, home, how we study the world around us. And some of our great citizen scientists are quite famous. So here we've got Gilbert White. He's deemed the father of ecology. And like many people of his time, he would have been a wealthy theologian. He maybe had the time to go out and draw and take notice of the world around him. And again, at that time, a lot of links would be with religion, is that by celebrating nature, you celebrate God. And I'm sure that if I had someone else do my cleaning and washing up for me, I'd do more science in as well. So a lot of times doing anything citizen science or this kind of thing is still a privilege, because it means that you have maybe the time or access to materials that not everyone else has. But one of our other great citizen scientists is Mary Anning. If you haven't heard of Mary, she is the person that found all of these amazing fossils on the seashore. Her expertise with the drawing as well. You can see some of the descriptions. A lot of her stuff's in the Natural History Museum. The specimens that she had found was maybe sold because she's from quite a poor background, so being female and poor limited her choices in life. But she loved what she did, and she would sell these specimens. And if you don't know, for a discovery to be kind of catalogued and noted, you would have to get it to the Natural History Museum. It would need to be described as a new specimen. Then you have a type. And when you've got the type, it's what everything else is compared to, and it sits in this named, and it has the Latin binomial named after it. And a lot of times it will be the people that paid her, and she never necessarily got the recognition in her lifetime. But another thing from that era is when we have a look at discoveries, social context is always really important. And when you had discoveries maybe from the seaside and paleontology, or even with seaweeds and such like, the fact that you had a railway network means that you could race back to London quickly and get these things described. So there's a lot of social context to take in. And then also the Golden Age of Islam. If anybody's never really heard of it, I'd go and have a look at some of the discoveries of which were maybe visible in the Middle East in some of like 9th, 10th centuries, that made their way through Europe, and travellers bought into Europe as maybe credited as their own. So historically, science has always been linked with the arts, and now you haven't come to the wrong talk, but this is my favourite piece of art. It's an experiment on a bird in the air pump, which hangs in the National Gallery. I went there a few weeks ago with friends, went to see this picture, and for me, although we don't think of it necessarily as science, in its background, it was kind of groundbreaking, because up till then, people didn't necessarily paint science. They maybe painted their family or religious scenes. And even though I know that it's just a series of pigments on a paper, I can see so much more. And like Through said, it's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see. And my experience as well tells me that these two young girls are in a distress. You've got the bird in the pump there, of which somebody's operating the pump. And I know as well the experience here, these people aren't worried because they've seen this trick, so to speak, before, and no harm will come to the bird. But also, from an expert point of view, when I was at the gallery with friends, one recommended me to a podcast called Moving Pictures, and I'm very much an end user. I like it, I don't need to pull it apart to know, but there is some talk about this couple here are meant to be gazing in the eyes of each other. And the expert said, I don't think that's right. I think what's happening is just that their line of vision, the lady's looking away because she doesn't want to look, and the other guy's looking with fascination. And so again, it becomes this expertise range of which you're discussing. So even though we're all looking at the same scene, we're possibly seeing something different based on our experiences. And this is where citizen science comes in as well. So again, at the gallery, this is from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but Stubbs has the famous whistle jacket at the gallery, and he was a great anatomist. So he would have a space in his barn for which he'd cut up horses and have a look at the anatomy, because he wanted to have that precision representation of the animals. And then also botany and art, high link. So this lady here, Maria, that I can't remember her name without reading it, Maria Sibylla Merian, she came back, she had drawings of Suriname. Not only was she groundbreaking, is that one of the first dedication of the wildlife of Suriname, but she made lots of comments and observations about life cycles. And although we look at them and know that they're older art, it's still very much an influence today. I didn't take a credit for this person I saw on social media, so I'm really sorry. But she's taking notes of speedwells and she's drawing. So that art and science thing carries on, but it's still observations. These people are making observations of the world around them, and they're making notes themselves. And a lot of times we'll have training, like we saw with the Galaxy Zoo and that new discovery. And although that our training is often, you may be able to get courses online, you don't have to do it as a job, it's maybe downloaded. What we'll also have is heuristic things, which is what people learn over time, but they're not necessarily in the traditional way or the same. It's whatever works for them. So I know someone who was involved with butterfly conservation, and he didn't look at butterflies necessarily on the colours that I would look at. He looked at how they behaved, as in their flight pattern. And this is where expertise comes in. It's not necessarily the same thing for everyone. We all learn in a different way. And just because someone hasn't been classically trained or necessarily educated in the same way, it doesn't mean to say what they have to offer doesn't count. It may be a new way for us to do it. And we complement. These things become a big jigsaw rather than just a standard way of looking at things. So I'll go a little bit about my PhD, which same was accuracy, error and bias in species identification. And without going too much on what species is, that we had the discussion before, it can be very different in different things. But as we know, generally, when it comes to sexual selection, you need to have species that are together. And this cartoon and infographic really made me laugh, because this is what I end up doing with gatekeepers and stuff. It's like, is it 1 dot or 2 dots? And there comes a point of which things are different and then things are similar. And that's not always easy to pinpoint. So you know an ant and a horse are different. Then you start to get down to a moth and a butterfly. All right, they maybe overlap, and then there's things with different colours. But also with citizen science, I think there's sometimes an assumption that other people know what we do. Like when you're born, you're a blank canvas. So everybody's perceptions are made up of their experiences. And when I worked at the Record Centre is when the Harlequin ladybird was really taken off and spreading as invasive species, and we did a call out, and we got sent things like, I think it was a 6-spot bonnet moth, but it was black and red. And at first you look and you think, well, how can you tell it's not a beetle and it's a moth? But if you've never seen, and that's all you're looking at, then it's not something to laugh at. It's just one of our collections of interests. And so that's the other thing with citizen science, is that just because someone starts at this point, like we saw with that concentric circle, it's just their starting point from which to learn. So the PhD was in conservation, which is based on face cognition methods from psychology, which was really, really interesting. And like a lot of things, the terms used there are quite different from how we do with ordinary language. But what was really interesting for Marcus, so these top 3 and this person here, he was my second supervisor. And at one point, what you'd often do with image matching is you'd have a picture of one species, picture of another, picture of one person, picture of another. But in his lab, he was saying is that even though we have the pictures of different people, if you have a picture of the same person but from different perspectives, people can't always tell. Now, I look straight away and I know that's Marcus because I'm familiar with him. But if you're unfamiliar, I mean, it does look like he's about to kind of rob a bank there. But if you're unfamiliar, it's not that easy to tell. So even though you may learn something from a citizen science point of view, you think that when you have a guide, you've got photos, you've got illustrations, you've got backgrounds, you've got lots of different bits and pieces for which may indicate what you're looking at. But there's as much variation within species as there is between species. So this is part of what we were looking at and trying to investigate. And so much so that there's a seminal paper for which passport officers in Australia were asked to match images. So if you think for some of their jobs as well, you'd be matching images, either a person with a passport or maybe a picture of two people because you've seen it elsewhere. And they found that it didn't matter how long someone had been doing the job or how much training they'd received. If you were good at it, you were good at it. And if you weren't, you weren't. And the Met police set up a thing called super recognisers. So they're recruited from within their ranks because there were people that were just really good at matching images. And if you imagine the volume of images to go through, whether it's stills as photos, whether it's stills from videos or moving images, and it just seemed to be a skill. And this I find quite interesting in that when we run, well, I'm not aware of it, but when we run identification courses, I've yet to be aware of anyone that tests people for their image matching skills beforehand, because it could be you get to the end and how well do you recognise things, and it turns out that those skills were there already, even though you've had the training. And again, as an aside, that's sometimes quite difficult to get around, you don't know what it is, and sometimes you recognise and you can't name it, and other times you know straight away and you can name it. And so there's still several different stages before getting used to something or understanding what it is. So much of the work that maybe happens now is through. So although we've moved away from drawings, moved to photographs, which basically translate as drawing with light, and photographs are brilliant because they can be in real time, they can be sent across the world, they are cross-cultural in that you don't necessarily have to have the language, you can just look at an image. And this is an example of iNaturalist. We have iRecord, of which you can submit your records to, but iNaturalist is where, again, it's a community. So you take a photo, you upload the phone, and you share with fellow naturalists and discuss your findings. And I think this is part of one of the greatest learning curves in anything, is getting it wrong. Because when you discuss your findings, part of the citizen science thing is not only you might have someone whoever, I think this is another platform that rates like 5 stars or something, not quite McDonald's, but you then have people who have experience, but they'll tell you what they're looking at. They'll tell you what to look for, and they'll maybe ask, which part of the country did you see this? What time of year did you see it? And you'll start to build up a picture of how these things are important. And especially for something like this, because say that's a caterpillar and that's an adult moth or butterfly, obviously those stages count, but also maybe which food plant they're with. So lots of other information. And by taking part in something like this, it's not necessarily a structured learning curve, but it's things about that you can associate and you can start to build up a bigger picture. And of course, images, how hard can it be? This is another Zooniverse platform. This particular research found that sometimes volunteers are more accurate than scientists, but you'll also see a problem is that where we said about perspectives before, you've got markings on this tail, but the light's different here, it's in the shadow. So what are you looking at? Are you looking at the shape? Are you looking at the tail? I mean, they look very different, but it could well be that actually those markings are there and we just can't see them. So there are limitations, but with most of this talk, it's trying to get across that there's not a wrong or right way. It's just that we're trying to do our best with the resources we have. So everything here is a trade-off. So here, what species do you see in this picture? It's not a trick question. Zebra, yeah. Does anybody see anything else? So, plant blindness. This is for all my botany friends in that straight away, zebra, of course, plants are just there to feed the animals anyway. But straight away, depending on what you're looking for, what's your question? If you're having a BioBlitz in there, there'll be loads to take data and collect information from. But for me, that's my photo. I wouldn't have taken it if the zebra wasn't in it. It's just green, isn't it? And also knowledge about behaviour. So you'd think from this picture that polar bears were 10 a penny, that there wasn't necessarily a problem. Why do they need protecting? But your expertise or experience leads you to know that a dead whale carcass will attract, they have a really good sense of smell and attract them. So again, it's not only the perception, it's the context in which you've seen something in. And expectations, you might have things, oh, I've seen a ladybird, and then you present someone with the fact there's 42 ladybird species, approximately, correct me if I'm wrong. And then even worse, you then have something that harlequin that I referred to before, that has lots of different colours, but once you start to get to know, you realise that for part of the identification things, the harlequin is they maybe have reddy brown legs, they'll have a characteristic M on the head, the size, and so you start to build up a picture. So there's always things to trick you. So as in nature, it's always this way until it's not. And on the left, there's a picture of Eclectus parrots. Assumptions can be very dangerous. So originally, these were thought to be two separate species because it's only the male in birds that's brightly coloured and the female isn't. Although in this case, as you can see, there's mating, courting behaviour and nesting. So although there is sexual dimorphism in colours, which is how we sometimes tell some species apart, there's also exceptions to the rule. And again, anybody tell me what these species are? I know Sam can because that's cheating, inside information. Go on. Okay, so usually one of the distinguishing marks for adders is that they'll have zigzags across their back. Now, sexual dimorphism as well, that's a male, that's a female because of the colouring. But of course, there's always exceptions because you can have melanism where something's black, you can have leucistic where it's white, or maybe albino where it's white with pink eyes. But here, this is a particular population nearby which is being monitored, and instead of zigzags, they have stripes. So again, you can learn, but this is where it sits with citizen science and experts and expertise as you start to piece together some of the indicators. There's never a silver bullet of what one thing is. And also to confuse you, there's life cycles. Here we've got butterfly, which we'll often know. And then here is jellyfish, for which there's different. We'll often see it in the Medusa phase, which is what we'll see in the oceans. And this here is my photo, Odonata emerging. I think from this it's maybe a damselfly, demoiselle, but where it's emerging, it won't have got its colours yet, it won't have pumped up, the wing won't have taken shape, but from an expertise or experience point of view, I know that what I can do is when it has fully emerged, that case can be known as exuviae, I can then tell what species it is from there. So again, it's all these different bits of information, the cure. And culturally, the life cycle thing is something we're quite used to because we see a lot in our books growing up, Hungry Caterpillar and such like, about life cycles, so we're used to them, but I've never seen one about jellyfish before. And then mimicry, just to really confuse you. In butterflies, it's quite prevalent. And also not to forget that the world is dynamic, especially with changes, climate change, our spatial distributions change, which they do anyway, because you'll have cross-continent, we'll have movement with people. Down at Sandwich Bay, you'll see birds that are often seen somewhere else in the world because they just got blown off course, but that's not representative of UK birds. But your knowledge will be is that if you know that that's kind of vagrants you see, But this is where we have to be careful, is when you have atlases and guides and spatial distribution, they're written at a point in time. Whereas a lot of times if we have interactive guides and it's constantly changing, it will not stay the same. What can maybe say like hummingbird, hawk moth, not so long ago you'd maybe see them, but they wouldn't necessarily overwinter, whereas that's changing. But then other things maybe have to move north where the climate envelope is becoming not quite right. So that's a constantly shifting thing too. And species, we've got evolving and there's changes. We don't often get that many new species that's maybe described that's mammal. We get lots of different species, but it's not necessarily that they're new. It's just that they've become described, as I said before, about they're named and then it's accepted that it's a new species. But what I want to concentrate at the moment is on this. So this is great. Say you were setting up a citizen science thing and saying, look, we've got this that we don't want. Can you have a look in your gardens, anywhere you are, to see what's native and what's not? Whoever gets the opportunity to not only find these things, but hold them like that. And so a lot of the things we look at when it comes to guides are comparative. This is bigger, this is smaller. But unless you've had the experience of seeing them, it's not always that easy to tell. And what will happen as well, over time, once you get your eye in, you'll start to pick out things. So for here, this is about the Iberian lynx. That's a bobcat. So I know it's a bobcat, mainly because I can hear other people gasping. But if you have an ID guide, it'll start with, well, tufts on the ears, short tail, cat-like, great. Sometimes it's laziness, but also you have to understand if someone's trying to get a story out, you'll have algorithms and you might type in, say you typed in lynx. The algorithms on the page or your searches will return what's in the page. So just because the image comes up, it doesn't necessarily mean it's what you've typed in. It means it matches something else that's maybe in the text further down. So that's also very enlightening when you see that. And so you've then, again, got the images. So it's got here, larger, smaller paws, straight back, arch back. Yeah, if they all stand still in your vision and were near each other, you'd be fine. But these are things that aren't always that easy to learn, and it takes a bit of time. And then again, with images in the guide, the illustrations, when you actually take a picture, which this is from Bees, Wasps and Ants Recording Society, you'll notice that the wings are folded, you can't necessarily see the size of the eyes or the legs. But again, this is, like I say, net gain, doing the best with what we can. It's not perfect, but the reality is, especially if you're looking at, sorry, I asked Jess to give me a time prompt, I haven't got my glasses on. Okay. If you are thinking about trying to get these expertly identified, you need to collect them, you'd need to send them off, you'd then be relying on a handful of experts having the time to dedicate to do this. And it's not always that easy. One of my papers, it did get criticised because I only had 7 bumblebee experts. But 1, there aren't that many, and 2, I can't make them do my research. And so again, it's a trade-off by what we can achieve with what we've got. But also think about when you do have images and you want other people to maybe look at them, identifying features, but you might not have that choice if it just buzzes off. But this is like a mount in a museum that's out there for people to compare their specimens to. So my matching bumblebee, the paper is out on this, and I tried using the methods that we saw before with facial recognition, match and mismatch, and with this is a match at the top, but rather than the same image, like we were saying before, this is the same species, but from 2 different guides, whereas at the bottom is a mismatch. And when you stare at it, you might see that they've got this yellow striation here, but you might not. It's surprising that when you think you see it and it's obvious, it doesn't mean that it's obvious to other people. And then my other paper was about newts. They were a good model species because they're protected, and so usually if you see newts, it's because you're meant to have a license to handle them. So I asked lots of people with great crested newt licenses to look, and what you have here, there are images that were sorted, and what the people had to do is these were the species present in the images, and this is what people chose them to be. So you've got alpine newt, palm, smooth newts, great crested newts, and these hybrids, or rather just at genus level. And here we have a confusion matrix. So if you go doing surveys, you'll often hear that people say about the small newts, which is the same genus, are easily confused. And even with people with great crested newt, I know that they're not handling them, that they're only looking at images, but images is often the way you'll see recording groups will get information. You can see with the great crested newt, there aren't many confusing things, the same with the alpine newt. But here, there's quite a bit of confusion where it was actually a smooth newt and people actually a palmate newt, but people identified them as smooth newts. So it's not even clear cut, even with people who have that experience. And then also from the same paper is that people were self-assessed and self-assessed against the peers. So you've got here, very good, down to good. Now, if you have a look, this person saw themselves as good, saw themselves as worse than the peers, but actually had a really good overall score. And then when it came to the species, which means the ones we were looking at, not the ones that other people named, but the ones that are in the images, scored really high. Whereas some other people, their confidence, but there's no reason why not, because what they see is good and they do as a job. So it's not necessarily an arrogance thing, it's a confidence in what they're looking at. And we'll often hear about imposter syndrome, but again, talking about community, I think that this is really important because it's what we know, and we all know different things, but they still go into the mix. Here we have a thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and this isn't necessarily an overconfidence, this is just as you learn and you gain experience and you perfect your expertise, that what's actually happening is that you understand there's nuances. You understand that it's not as clear-cut when you first picked up that ID guide and there's only 4 newts in the UK. You start to learn and you start to learn more and you start to question yourself. And this is where I think expertise starts to really come into play, that somebody's questioning what they've seen and maybe gets advice from other people. And again, there are some cases of which people just know. How do you explain that? I look at it and I know. What's this picture? I just know. So this does talk about the GIS of pattern recognition, and it does predate. You'll often hear people about GISS, general information of size and shape, but that actually comes from aircraft in World War II. But again, it's the same. It's looking at the objects, how we look at them, how they fly, what shape they are. But you can transfer expertise. This is widely used in medical training. If there's an X-ray of a chest, so there'll be eye tracking goggles, of which, just in case you don't know what goggles do on the eyes, eye tracking goggles which will scan. So someone might think they're explaining someone, but actually if you track where their eyes are, and then that used to train where an expert will look or someone who's a established radiographer, and then how that goes to a trainee where to look before you find out what you're looking for. And on the flip side, misinformation and misunderstanding also can be quite tricky. So this here, if you've never seen it, Horniman Museum, South London. This is the Horniman walrus. Somebody sent the skin back. We have a very skilled and expert taxidermist who mounted everything in the museum, but he had no reference point for a walrus. So everybody thinks it's laughable because it's overstuffed. It has no wrinkles because he was doing the best he had without any kind of visual prompt. He didn't know what else to do. And as my friend Helen said, you've got to go some to make a walrus look even fatter. And then the downside of misidentification is exemplified in this story here. So in New Zealand, you'd have, this is protected takahi, if that's how you say it, and then you have the Bukeku who was kind of out competing it, so they wanted to cull the top one to protect the bottom one. So they got some deer, stalkers to shoot them. But what the deer stalkers did is they shot the protected ones. So again, what's your expertise in? So it doesn't matter, they'll probably be very accurate, there was no welfare problem, but the identification meant that they just got the wrong bird and exacerbated the problem. So misidentification does have consequences too. And it doesn't help with a lot of the stuff you see in the media. On the left, picture of collared doves when it's meant to be about turtle doves. On the left, story about hyenas, whereas somebody's put wild dogs in, and this is just an example picture of what hyenas actually look like from the front of the journal. And I wanted to touch a little bit on qualitative data because we're running out of time. So for part of the Relate project that I did with Zoe and Jess, we interviewed lots of different people and got them to speak about what they liked about nature. And from an ecology point of view, we'll often speak about species and metrics and functions and such like. But what the people spoke about was very different analogies. There was a lot of language that came out about how they enjoyed, what they thought about nature. You can have folklore and mythology, or you can have folk taxonomy where people have names. We use Latin binomials, but there'll be names like a grass snake, but it might be a snake in the grass. So traditionally in certain areas you might call different species the grass snake, although we use it as a common name. So language is also very important. And it's also not necessarily the same across cultures. So this study, Deborah Roberson does a lot of work on colour. And this study here, this links to Barinmo people who are in Papua New Guinea, and these are different colour words for their colour ranges. But if you then go to the Himba, who are nomadic people in southern Africa, they're definitely terrestrial, they then have different names and different collection of colours. So again, how we describe, and like most things in life, communication is key, and it's two-way. So part of the expertise is knowing who you're speaking to and about what. And it's very important, like I said at the beginning, the data flow in the UK will have the biological records from all these different recording groups, from all these different observations, and they feed in some really top-heavy, very important decisions. And so accuracy is of great importance, but I never see it in any kind of research, although I see some kind of reference to confidence intervals, 95%, metrics to do with statistics. I never see any discussion about the accuracy of the records that people are using. And again, it's not a criticism, it's just we're doing the best with what we've got, but it's also a matter of scale. So going back to the databases that hold the information, if you see here, it's 300 million records, and that's the NBN Atlas National Biodiversity Network. And that's just one of many databases, but it's also one of the bigger portals that people are encouraged to send their records to. Not everyone does, that's another bias, because it's not always that easy to do. But if you think of a question of scale, even if it's a tiny percentage that isn't quite right, it soon scales up. But going back to expertise, it matters. It changes how you perceive things. But what I wanted to do is not only reiterate that it's movable, but we've seen a lot of cases of their expertise, but in different ways. So how it overacts, how it comes together, and how relevant it is. Everyone has something to offer. With system science, everyone has something to learn. If we all pool our resources, whether it's from peers, from other disciplines, but whatever your experience, keep asking questions. I think if you're delivering any kind of system science project, you have to think about the people who are helping you, and again, good communication, because it's all about the strengths and weaknesses. But whatever you do, just stay curious. Thank you.